To confirm her suspicions, this middle-aged woman decided to take a dangerous step. She hired a young and stunning escort to seduce her husband. She wanted to test his loyalty through this extreme and risky experiment. By doing so, she hoped to uncover his secret affair with a young student. But what she didn't expect was that, instead of exposing her husband, she herself would fall helplessly into the trap of temptation. Catherine was a successful obstetrician and gynecologist. She had what seemed like a perfect middle-class family. On her husband Michael's birthday, she organized a grand party, planning every detail with care. But the night went on, and Michael never came home. When she finally called, she learned that he had missed his flight and would be delayed for several hours. Hearing that, Catherine's heart sank in disappointment. What she didn't know was her husband was spending that very night with one of his students. The party, missing its main guest, turned into her silent humiliation. Later that night, she sat before the mirror, staring at the marks time had left on her face. Her former beauty had long faded. She believed she no longer held any charm in her husband's eyes. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window, touching Catherine's tired face. As she opened her eyes, she saw her husband getting ready to leave. Perhaps, like many middle-aged couples, they were now bound more by friendship than passion. She didn't even feel angry about his broken promise anymore. Instead, when she noticed her son's girlfriend had stayed overnight, a strange irritation rose within her. Just as she was about to leave for work, she suddenly heard a phone ringing inside her husband's coat. Ignoring his privacy, she took it out and checked. There she found a photo of her husband and a young female student together. Though she was almost certain he was having an affair, without solid proof, she chose to stay silent. That evening, they dined out with friends. To her shock, Michael shamelessly flirted with the waitress in front of everyone as if it was something completely ordinary. Holding back her anger, Catherine escaped to the restroom to gather herself. Perhaps only solitude could help her silence the turmoil inside. But just then, she heard quiet sobs coming from the next stall. Moved by instinct, she handed over a tissue to the crying woman. That simple gesture of handing a tissue, however, would soon unravel hidden meanings. When the girl stepped out of the restroom, she thanked Catherine sincerely. Then, out of nowhere, she tried to offer her hairpin as a gift without reason, strange and sudden. Feeling uneasy, accepting something she hadn't earned, Catherine politely declined. When she returned to her seat, her friend teased with a knowing smile. "This fancy restaurant," she said, "is also known as a place for secret affairs. There are plenty of escorts who mingle here, pretending to be regular guests." As they chatted, Catherine's gaze caught sight of that same girl from the restroom. The girl ignored the man who was caressing her cheek, her eyes locked directly onto Catherine's calm and deliberate. On their way home, Catherine and Michael began to argue. She confronted him not just about flirting with the waitress, but about whether he had gone out drinking, or worse, on his birthday night. "You went out drinking, didn't you?" she demanded. "No," he replied curtly. Catherine stared at him, her disbelief almost painful. She was convinced he was hiding something. Then she spotted the same girl from the previous night entering a bar. A bold idea sparked in her mind. That evening, after work, she decided to follow the impulse and went inside. After a short conversation, she learned the girl's name, Chloe, a professional escort, beautiful and confident, golden curls, seductive eyes, a figure that drew every gaze in the room. Catherine thought bitterly, yes, that's exactly his type. So she took a deep breath and confessed her plan. "My husband," she said slowly, "is having an affair. At least, that's what I feel. I want to know for sure. I want to see what he would do if a beautiful stranger threw herself into his arms." And so, the two women made their secret agreement. Following Catherine's instructions, Chloe went to the cafe Michael often visited. Pretending to be a college student, she struck up a casual conversation. As expected, Michael couldn't resist. His interest was immediate. He asked for Chloe's contact before leaving. The next day, Chloe reported back to Catherine with the results of the test. Although nothing physical had happened yet, the truth was clear enough. But the thought of her husband flirting with a stranger burned inside Catherine like fire. Every image, every imagined smile between them seared her heart. Yet, she didn't want Chloe to see her pain or humiliation, so she forced herself to stay composed and changed the subject. "Why did you choose this line of work?" she asked quietly. The question made Chloe hesitate, her confidence momentarily cracking. But after a pause, she answered truthfully, "It's just business. People come and go. Everyone gets what they need." Then she added softly, "But this is the first time I've ever met a client's family." As those words hung in the air, Catherine quickly reached into her purse and handed over the payment. Then, with a trembling voice, she made another request. "I want you to meet him again. See how he reacts this time. Then it's over, all right?" "All right," Chloe agreed. That evening, when Catherine returned home, she saw Michael browsing online. He was smiling, a warm, almost youthful smile she hadn't seen in years. The sight cut her deeply. Until she had the full truth, all she could do was quietly avoid confrontation. As she passed her son's room, she accidentally walked in on him mid-argument during a video call. Embarrassed and angry, the boy slammed the door shut. Later that night, Catherine found Michael again. She told him their son had just gone through a breakup. Wanting to comfort her, Michael opened a bottle of expensive whiskey and poured her a glass. Then he pulled her gently into his arms, whispering calm reassurances. He knew her too well, every insecurity, every wound. With just a few soft words, he managed to make her forget, if only for a moment, all her suspicions. The next morning, Catherine saw her son talking on the phone outside. Curiosity stirred inside her, and she quietly opened the window. "Did you ever feel that way about Mom too?" she overheard her son ask. "Like, how did you describe it when you first met her?" "She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen," Michael replied. Hearing those words, Catherine's heart lit up, her smile returning like sunlight after rain. For the first time in a long while, she felt warmth where there had only been doubt. But just then, her phone buzzed on the table. The message was from Chloe. A flicker of regret crossed Catherine's mind, but at least her husband hadn't actually slept with Chloe. So she went to the cafe where they had agreed to meet, her heart heavy but composed. She told Chloe perhaps she had been a little paranoid before. Now, she just wanted Chloe to forget everything as if nothing had ever happened. But unexpectedly, Chloe claimed she had just parted ways with Michael. They'd had lunch together near a quiet park, she said softly. Then they'd walked together into a deserted greenhouse, away from the crowds. They found a secluded corner where no one could see them. "Enough!" Catherine's voice broke through sharply, cutting Chloe off mid-sentence. She was on the verge of collapse, her world spinning out of control. She couldn't bear to hear another word, another detail of what might have happened. "I don't understand what you want from me. It was my mistake. I never should have dragged you into this." Before Chloe could respond, Catherine rushed to her car and drove off. But traffic had blocked her way. She couldn't leave. Through the windshield, she saw Chloe step out of the cafe. Moments later, the girl slipped on the wet pavement and fell hard to the ground. Catherine instinctively ran to her, helping her back into the cafe. She grabbed the first aid kit from her car and tended to the bleeding. To make it easier for Catherine to clean the wound, Chloe quietly took off her warm sweater, revealing pale skin beneath. Then, as if nothing had happened, Chloe continued talking about Michael. When she finished, Catherine sat in silence. After a long pause, she asked something shocking. "No offense. I just need to know, are you clean?" "Clean?" Chloe blinked in confusion. I just need to know if you're clean." "I've been tested," Chloe replied calmly. "For everything HIV, all the others." "Show me the results," Catherine said quietly. "Of course, no problem." The next day, Chloe went to the gynecology clinic. She intended to hand Catherine her medical report, but by coincidence, she ran into Catherine's son instead. He was standing by a printer, finishing some sheet music. Chloe approached him politely, starting a light conversation. She said she loved music, especially classical pieces with unique character. Especially classical music, the kind that carries its own haunting character. But before they could talk for long, Catherine appeared, walking out of the clinic hallway. Chloe immediately handed her the medical report. Then, almost too calmly, She said that Michael had arranged to meet her at a hotel. Time passed slowly. At tea with her friend, Catherine couldn't relax. Her friend kept talking about men cheating on their wives, and Catherine, trapped in her own suspicions, could barely sit still. Then suddenly, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was an address, a hotel downtown. Making an excuse about visiting a patient, she hurriedly left the cafe. But when Catherine entered the hotel room, what met her eyes was utter chaos. The sheets were disheveled, the air thick with something unspoken. Then Chloe whispered to her, "Michael and I were together again." The room itself is the proof. Catherine struggled to control the storm rising inside her, but the evidence, real or imagined, was too much to bear. She handed Chloe the last payment and turned to leave. While waiting for the elevator, she suddenly asked, "What perfume are you wearing?" "It's lotion," Chloe replied softly. Before Catherine could respond, Chloe dabbed a little on the back of her hand. The scent stirred something deep inside Catherine. She began reminiscing about the woman she once was. Once upon a time, she and Michael had been inseparable. Every moment together had felt like the first days of love. Even a few minutes apart had felt unbearable. "Do you still love him?" Chloe asked quietly. I don't know," Catherine whispered. Seeing her so lost and fragile, a strange tenderness flickered in Chloe's eyes. Without thinking, she leaned forward and kissed her. But after that fleeting moment of weakness, Catherine pulled away. She pushed Chloe back and left in a rush, breath unsteady. At her son's recital later that week, Catherine deliberately sat apart from her husband, distance now her only defense. Only while watching her son's flawless performance did Catherine feel a trace of comfort, a momentary peace piercing through the chaos of her heart. When the recital finally ended, she once again caught sight of her husband flirting with a waitress. The moment he saw her, Michael hurried toward her. He smiled and thanked her for raising such an extraordinary son. "What's that smell? Are you wearing perfume?" "It's lotion," she murmured. "I like it," he said simply. Hearing those words, "I like it," shattered her completely. It was the same scent Chloe had rubbed onto her skin. Catherine's chest tightened. She fled the theater in silence. She found Chloe, and without explanation, dragged her to a hotel. Her mind burned with the thought of revenge, to hurt Michael as he had hurt her. But in the last second, she stopped herself, realizing how senseless it was. Seeing her trembling, Chloe came up behind her, her hands gentle, soothing the storm inside Catherine's heart. One thing led to another, and what followed cannot be spoken aloud. Afterward, Chloe quietly drove her home. Before leaving, she pressed her own hairpin into Catherine's palm. Catherine refused at first, shaking her head weakly. But in the end, she accepted it, perhaps out of exhaustion, perhaps resignation. Her silence said everything. Let's never see each other again. Yet when she stepped into her house, Michael was already there, waiting in the dim light. "Who was that woman?" he asked quietly. "Have you fallen for someone else?" "So what if I have?" she snapped. Her heart was chaos, raw, aching, defiant. It was he who had betrayed her first, not the other way around. And yet, here he was, accusing her, like the guilty often do. Rage boiled over. Her restraint broke. She shouted about the flirtatious texts between him and his student. Their voices rose, trembling with years of pain and misunderstanding. The argument grew so fierce that their son, startled upstairs, woke in fright. There was nothing left to say, only silence and distance. The next morning, Catherine arrived at her clinic, weary and hollow. She opened her email and froze at a new message from Chloe. Attached was a photo, one that made her blood run cold. In panic, she dialed Chloe's number immediately. But to her shock, Chloe was already waiting by the door, as if she knew Catherine would come. The sight of her standing there sent a wave of confusion and panic through Catherine's chest. She couldn't understand why this woman kept clinging to her, why she refused to disappear from her life. So she handed Chloe a large check, her voice cold and trembling. "This has to stop. End this nonsense right now." But Chloe's face twisted with anger, her emotions unraveling in an instant. "This is it then?" she shouted. "Everything we shared. Everything, it's all just a transaction to you?" Catherine's voice broke slightly. "Fine. I'm begging you. Please. Just go. And so, Chloe was thrown out of the office coldly, without hesitation. But she didn't leave quietly. Bitterness festered inside her like a wound that refused to close. She sought out Catherine's son. With a sweet, practiced smile, she handed him a CD, her favorite band. When Catherine came home that evening, she heard unfamiliar music drifting from her son's room. A chill ran down her spine. Something felt terribly wrong. She stormed in, demanding to know whether he'd been in contact with Chloe. The boy froze, confused and defensive. Just then, her phone buzzed a new message. It was from Chloe, claiming that Michael had arranged to meet her again. Catherine's hands trembled. She needed to know the truth once and for all. So she made a decision, a confrontation. Without telling either of them, she invited Michael and Chloe to meet at the same time in the same place. She wanted the lies stripped bare, wanted her marriage saved if it still could be. When they met, Catherine spoke first, her voice trembling but honest. "I need to know the truth, Michael. All of it." He hesitated, clearly hiding something, yet he still denied ever betraying her. Then, suddenly, the door opened. Chloe walked in, completely unaware of what awaited her. When her eyes met Michael's, she froze. Panic flooded her face. She turned on her heel and ran, trembling, out the door. And from Michael's expression, Catherine suddenly understood everything. He didn't recognize Chloe at all. In that instant, the truth hit her like lightning. Her husband had never betrayed her. It was she who had fallen into temptation, she who had crossed the line. Crushed by guilt, Catherine broke down. Through tears, she confessed everything, how she'd hired Chloe, and how far things had gone. "She said she kissed you," Catherine whispered, "and that you seemed to like it." When Michael learned the truth, he didn't lash out or condemn her. Instead, he saw the pain that had been consuming Catherine's heart, the loneliness, the doubt, the silent suffering. In that quiet moment, they finally let go of pride, forgave each other, and fell into each other's arms once more. But the story didn't end there. Chloe, unable to bear being abandoned, decided to take her revenge. She turned her sights on Catherine's son. Meanwhile, Catherine, newly reconciled with her husband, returned home only to stumble upon a scene that froze her blood. Her son lying in bed beside Chloe. Fury exploded inside her. She shouted, ordering her son to get out immediately. She turned to Chloe, trying to calm her, to end this madness once and for all. But she hadn't realized how unstable Chloe truly was. The girl wanted to stay, wanted Catherine to love her the same way. Her eyes wild, her voice trembling with obsession. Things spiraled out of control. In the chaos, Catherine caught sight of her son's reflection in the window. Panicked, she shoved Chloe aside instinctively. But Chloe stumbled, crashing through the glass. For one terrifying second, Catherine grabbed her arm, holding on. Then, in a haunting act of surrender, Chloe looked into her eyes and let go. It was her final escape, a way to free herself from a love that had devoured her. When the police finally took her body away, a hollow silence fell over the house. Peace, at last, or something that only looked like it. Not long after, the family held another gathering, smiles restored, music and laughter filling the rooms again. Catherine, radiant and calm, seemed to have buried her pain at last. But on her head, she still wore the hairpin, the one Chloe had given her. A quiet reminder, a haunting symbol that their story wasn't entirely over. And thus, the story comes to an end. A tale of love, guilt, and desire that blurs the line between devotion and destruction.